Welcome to Top Stories Hub. Today we've got a new story, a mystery you'll want to unravel. I was raised in a corner of the world where the breeze carried the scent of damp soil after a downpour, and dawn was ushered in by the chirping of birds nestled in lofty, swaying pines. My little hometown wasn't a place you'd find in glossy travel guides, it was far from famous. Tucked away from the hustle and bustle of urban life, it was quiet and unassuming, yet to me, it was everything. Home. We didn't have piles of money, but we weren't scraping by in desperation either, cash was just always a bit tight. My dad, James, a skilled woodworker, toiled from sunrise to sunset, his calloused hands crafting tables and chairs that ended up in homes far grander than ours. My mom, Emily, a dedicated teacher, filled young minds with math and reading, all while instilling in my sister and me the importance of grit and effort. Early on, I figured out that you don't need a fat bank account to feel wealthy. With meals on our table, a sturdy roof above us, and the sound of laughter echoing through our house, I felt like we had it all. That was my kind of rich. But the folks beyond our town's borders? They didn't get it. I still recall the moment it hit me how different we were from those city types, the ones with shiny loafers and an air of easy confidence, cruising by in sleek cars while we trudged to school along dusty paths. They chatted about far-off vacations to places I couldn't even pin on a map. Their birthday parties were spectacles, bursting with extravagance we only glimpsed on TV screens. At first, I didn't resent them, but I couldn't help wondering, what's it like to live where money's never a worry, where your dreams, not your wallet, shape your choices? Even so, my parents were my idols. Dad created beauty with his hands, turning raw wood into treasures, while Mom shaped futures with her wisdom, guiding kids toward knowledge. They gave me all they had, and for what they couldn't provide, they taught me I could forge my own way. I took their words to heart. In school, I poured in the effort, set on blazing my own trail. I wasn't the brightest kid in class, but I was dogged, staying late in the library, pestering teachers with questions long after they'd moved on to the next topic. That's where I crossed paths with Olivia. She was lingering by the library shelves, her fingers brushing the spines of thick novels, searching for something particular. I barely noticed her at first, she was just another face in my small world, until she turned, caught my gaze, and flashed a smile. In that instant, everything seemed to tilt. Olivia didn't belong to our town, I could sense it immediately. She carried an effortless poise, the kind that comes from growing up in a world miles apart from mine. Her style, her stance, even her way of speaking, it all stood out. Not in a showy or haughty way, just different. At first, I pegged her as one of those visitors, the kind who dip into places like ours to feel real for a bit before returning to their polished lives. But she kept showing up, and I couldn't stop noticing her. It started with small talk about books, but soon we were diving deeper, swapping thoughts on what we read, sharing stories about the town and its people. We spoke of tales, ambitions, and how the world seemed so varied depending on where you stood. She wasn't what I'd assumed, and maybe, just maybe, she saw a spark in me I hadn't yet recognized. Falling for Olivia wasn't something I planned, it snuck up on me, like a gentle current pulling you out to sea before you realize you're in too deep. The more time we spent together, the more I saw how our worlds diverged, not just in our lifestyles but in our outlooks. For me, life was about grinding for every gain, you worked hard, saved up, and if you were lucky, you moved forward. For Olivia, life brimmed with potential, focused on what could be, not just what was. She talked about the world as a place to wander and discover, not a battlefield to endure. For the first time, I started questioning myself, was I holding myself back? Was I so caught up in what I lacked that I overlooked what I could achieve? Loving Olivia, though, wasn't just about stolen moments in the library or leisurely strolls along the creek. It meant stepping into her world, one that felt alien to me, a place where money wasn't just currency but influence, where family names held sway, where dinner conversations revolved around stock portfolios, social clout, and lofty ambitions, not just daily routines. That's when the murmurs began, what's his job? Who's his family? Is he from a good background? The questions came wrapped in polite smiles and curious looks. They never said it directly, but I knew their thoughts. I didn't belong in their circle. I wasn't worthy of her. Yet Olivia never faltered. She gripped my hand tightly in rooms where I felt like an intruder, spoke of me with a pride that made me feel valued, not like someone she had to justify. That made me love her even more. The issue wasn't our love, it was the society around us, the people who couldn't accept that love could be about two souls connecting, not about wealth or prestige. When Olivia announced to her family that we were getting married, I braced myself for trouble. I didn't know just how rough it would get. Her mother, Patricia, had already made it crystal clear she didn't approve of me. But on our wedding day, she went further than I ever imagined. She grabbed the microphone and shamed me in front of everyone. Pointing at me with a calm voice and eyes dripping with subtle scorn, she declared, "We've welcomed a pauper and a leech into our family." Her words struck like a sledgehammer, heavier than I could have prepared for. The room went dead quiet, guests traded uneasy glances, unsure whether to stare at me or look away. I sat there, paralyzed, the weight of her accusation crushing me. For a fleeting moment, I thought this might be the end, the moment that would shatter me. But then, cutting through the stunned silence, another voice rang out. Olivia's grandmother, Evelyn, rose to her feet. She took the microphone, and what she said next turned everything upside down. The first time I met Patricia, Olivia's mom, I could tell she didn't care for me. I sensed it before she even spoke. She had this piercing, judgmental stare, like she was sizing me up and finding nothing of worth. It wasn't outright anger or hostility, Patricia was too refined for that. No, her feelings toward me were colder, disdain cloaked in courtesy. She didn't view me as a rival, to her, I was merely a nuisance. Olivia had given me a heads up before we headed to her parents' place for dinner. "She's picky," she'd said, her soft way of warning me about what lay ahead. I brushed it off with a chuckle. "She's your mom, how bad could it be?" I should have seen the red flags. That night, I walked into a house, no, a mansion, that felt like a shrine to everything I'd never had. It wasn't just huge, it was meticulously designed to flaunt wealth. From the chandeliers sparkling like icy cascades to the walls adorned with artwork worth more than my childhood home, every detail screamed opulence. And there was Patricia, waiting in the living room, standing with the poised confidence of someone who'd mastered the game of life. She was striking, but her beauty had a chilly edge, her hair flawless, her dress custom-fitted, her manicure in a shade so understated it screamed expense. She offered a smile that never touched her eyes. "Well," she said, eyeing me like I was a knockoff purse at a luxury boutique, "so this is the guy my daughter can't stop raving about." I grinned, offering my hand. "Good to meet you, Mrs. Bennet." She hesitated a beat too long before shaking my hand. That single moment told me everything, I wasn't wanted here. Dinner felt like dining with predators. The table was absurdly long for just 4 people, forcing us to raise our voices to talk. I kept my focus on Olivia beside me, her steady presence keeping me grounded. Across from us sat Patricia, with her husband, Michael, at her side. He was courteous, reserved, a man who let events unfold around him without intervening. He didn't come off as mean, just distant. Then Patricia got to work. "So, what exactly do you do for a living?" she asked, her tone slick and disinterested. "I'm in construction," I answered. "I oversee small projects around town." She gave a nod, not one of approval, just a faint acknowledgement that I existed. "How charming," she said. I caught a spark of annoyance in Olivia's eyes, but she held her tongue for now. Patricia leaned back, sipping her wine. "Tough work, no doubt. But it's not exactly steady, is it?" I forced a smile, though I felt tension creeping up my spine. "It's got its ups and downs, but I make it work." Olivia jumped in, her voice edged with irritation. "Mom, Ethan's incredible at his job. He loves what he does, and..." Oh, I'm sure he does, Patricia cut in, raising her glass. But, sweetheart, passion doesn't cover the bills, you know. A heavy silence fell, thick with unspoken judgments. Patricia turned her focus back to me. Your family's not in business, I take it. No, I said. My dad's a woodworker, and my mom's a teacher. That's when she flashed a genuine smile, the first I'd seen all evening. It was the smug grin of someone who just had their suspicions confirmed. Oh, salt-of-the-earth folks, then, she said, swirling her wine. Must have been tough for them, not having much to pass down to you. My gut tightened. She didn't say it outright, but her meaning was clear. I wasn't part of their world, and I never would be. Olivia pushed back. Mom, she snapped, her tone sharp. Patricia glanced at her, unfazed. What? I'm just chatting. You know I'm curious about all sorts of people. Olivia set her fork down, her face unreadable. Ethan's not some project. He doesn't need a leg up. He's earned everything he's got, more than some of the trust fund kids you know. Patricia's eyes narrowed just a touch, but she laughed, waving off the tension. Oh, honey, don't be so theatrical. I'm just interested. You know I love meeting new faces. I stayed quiet, not because I was at a loss, but because I saw her game. She wanted me to squirm, to show I was out of place. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. So I lifted my glass, met her stare, and smiled. Thanks for the curiosity, Mrs. Bennet. You're right, I didn't grow up with money, but I had something just as good, parents who showed me a person's value isn't tied to their wallet. Silence followed, not the awkward kind, but the kind that comes when someone lands an unexpected blow. Patricia's smile tightened, but she didn't push back. Michael let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head like he was mildly entertained. Olivia's hand found mine under the table, giving it a quick squeeze, and for the first time that night, I felt I'd scored a point. The real warning came after dinner, as Olivia and I lingered by the door, ready to leave. Patricia approached me alone, her face devoid of that fake smile. Let me be straight with you, Ethan, she said, her voice low, almost gentle. You seem like a solid guy, hardworking, down to earth. But my daughter, she shook her head. She's meant for a life bigger than the small-town routine you're so at ease with. I held her gaze. Olivia can make her own choices. Her lips twitched into a faint smirk. Sure. But do you honestly think this can last? I didn't respond, because we both knew her real question, do you think you're enough for her? Patricia stepped closer. If you truly care for her, you won't drag her down. You'll let her live the life she's meant for. A chill settled in my chest, not rage, not fear, just a stark realization. Patricia wasn't just trying to scare me, she was laying down a gauntlet. And that night, I understood this wasn't just about proving my worth, it was about outlasting her. I should have seen it coming the moment I proposed to Olivia. I knew Patricia would try to sabotage us. For months, she'd made it obvious she thought I wasn't good enough, slipping cutting remarks into polite small talk. She'd tried to split us up, urging Olivia to aim higher, telling me that if I really loved her, I'd set her free. But it didn't work, Olivia picked me. That choice, her quiet rebellion against the world Patricia ruled, pushed her mother to her last resort, public humiliation. I never thought she'd take it to such a public stage. The lead up to the big day was like a calm before a tempest. Our wedding morning kicked off flawlessly. I woke up with a jittery mix of anticipation and joy, my hands trembling slightly as I fumbled with my tie, but a grin stayed plastered on my face. My best man, Ryan, gave me a hearty slap on the back. Feeling the nerves, huh, he teased with a smirk. I let out a small chuckle. He shook his head, still grinning. Man, you ought to be terrified. Marriage is a lifelong deal, and you're signing up to tangle with Patricia Bennet for good. I rolled my eyes. Real helpful, Ryan. He flashed a wide smile. Hey, I'm stoked for you, dude. Olivia's amazing. But her mom? That's a whole different beast. I'd promised myself not to dwell on Patricia today. This day belonged to Olivia and me, not the ongoing battle her mother had been fighting against us. Deep down, though, I knew Patricia wasn't the type to just let things slide. The ceremony felt like a fleeting triumph. When Olivia glided down the aisle, the world around me melted away. She was stunning, her gown understated yet graceful, a perfect reflection of her. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, all the doubts, the hushed criticisms, the silent judgments vanished. It was just the two of us. When she reached me, her hands slipping into mine, I was certain nothing could tear this moment apart. The vows, rings, and promises flowed without a hitch. I kept a wary eye on Patricia, half expecting her to leap up with some dramatic objection, but she sat motionless, her face impossible to read. For a brief second, I let myself hope, maybe, just maybe, she'd finally come to terms with us. I couldn't have been more mistaken. The speech that turned everything upside down, the reception was buzzing with life. Music filled the air, guests were chuckling, and plates were piled high with food. Everything was picture perfect, until Patricia stepped up to the microphone. A sudden hush blanketed the room as she rose, her posture flawless, her smile unervingly polished. Olivia's grip on my hand tightened. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia began, her voice as smooth as velvet. "I'd like to take a moment to express my gratitude to all of you for joining us to celebrate my beloved daughter's wedding." I knew right then this wasn't a toast, it was a calculated strike. Olivia straightened, her voice low but firm. "Mom," she warned. Patricia didn't even glance her way. "As a little girl, Olivia dreamed of a storybook wedding," she went on. "A lavish event, a flawless prince at the altar, a future brimming with elegance and joy. My Olivia has always deserved nothing less than perfection." A few guests let out soft laughs, nodding, oblivious to the storm brewing. Then Patricia's gaze shifted to me. "But life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" she said, tilting her head with a faint smirk. "Sometimes, our kids make choices we never saw coming." The room went quiet, the silence heavy and uneasy. I felt the atmosphere shift, the tension coiling tight. I steeled myself. Patricia's eyes bored into mine, her smile turning razor-sharp. "That's why today, we're not just adding a new member to our family," she declared. "We're also making a rather generous act of charity." The crowd froze. After all, how many families can say they've opened their doors to a drifter and a mooch? The collective gasp hit before the weight of her words slammed into me. Olivia sprang to her feet. "Mom, enough." But Patricia wasn't finished. She let out a soft, almost taunting chuckle. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm just being truthful. Marriage is about give and take, isn't it? Olivia brings grace, wealth, and prestige, and she waved a vague hand in my direction, well, he offers a certain, unique perspective, I suppose." Whispers rippled through the room. Some guests squirmed in their seats, others avoided my gaze entirely. Patricia's smile widened. "So, let's raise a toast," she said, lifting her champagne flute, "to Olivia, my radiant daughter, whose generous heart has always extended to those less fortunate." I was at a loss. I'd braced for countless ways this night could go south, but this was a public lynching. She'd reduced me to nothing, a pitiful figure in front of everyone. Olivia trembled beside me, her fists clenched, her face flushed with rage. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, a new voice sliced through the stillness. The grandmother's comeback, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every head turned as Evelyn, Olivia's grandmother, rose slowly. She didn't raise her voice or grab the mic, but when she spoke, her words carried undeniable authority. "That's enough," she said. Patricia blinked, startled. "Mother." Evelyn's piercing, steady gaze locked onto her daughter. You've said plenty, Patricia. Patricia's composure wavered for a split second. Evelyn turned to the crowd, her eyes sweeping the room with a commanding presence. Isn't it remarkable, she said, her tone calm but resolute, how some folks conveniently forget their own roots. Patricia's face drained of color. Evelyn faced her daughter again. Because long before you were Michael Bennett's affluent wife, before you crafted this high and mighty persona, you were nothing more than a housemaid. The silence that followed was profound, not just shock, but a deep, collective disbelief. Patricia's jaw tightened. Mother, please. Evelyn stepped closer. You mopped these very floors. You washed dishes in this very kitchen. You wore second-hand clothes and ate scraps. Her voice stayed level, but it cut like a knife. And now you have the gall to stand here and label someone else a parasite. Patricia's hands trembled. Murmurs spread as the truth sank in. Evelyn's expression softened as she turned to me. Yet, he possesses something you've never had, Patricia. I swallowed hard. What's that? Evelyn's smile was warm. Honor. Patricia looked like she wanted to vanish. Evelyn addressed the room again. So, if anyone here should feel shame, it's not him. It's not my granddaughter. It's the woman who erased her own history. The crowd burst into applause. I glanced at Olivia, who stared at her grandmother as if seeing her anew. Patricia sank into her seat, her humiliation complete. I reached for Olivia's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt we'd come out on top. For a few heartbeats after Evelyn's words, the entire banquet hall stayed hushed. It wasn't just the silence of surprise, it was the kind that sinks deep, gripping everyone with the heavy truth that couldn't be ignored. Patricia, who'd spent the last year tearing me down, mocking me, branding me a beggar and a leech, sat rigid, like a statue. The arrogance, the polished charm, the effortless confidence she'd worn all evening, it was gone. She'd been laid bare. The woman who'd built a life looking down on me had come from the same humble beginnings I had. The turning point, Evelyn wasn't done. She moved forward with measured, deliberate steps, passing tables adorned with flawless centerpieces, gliding by guests still clutching their champagne flutes, torn between sipping or grappling with what they'd just heard. I watched as she paused beside Patricia, resting a hand lightly on the back of her chair, a gentle touch, but one loaded with unyielding meaning. You've spent all this time acting, Evelyn said, her voice soft yet powerful, pretending you were born into wealth, that you never faced hardship, that you never had to toil for the life you now lead. Patricia finally stirred, her eyes wide, her breathing uneven. Mother, she whispered sharply, not here. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. And why not? Patricia's jaw clenched, her fingers gripping her champagne glass so tightly I thought it might crack, though she didn't drink. Because, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady, this isn't the moment. Evelyn let out a quiet, sardonic laugh. Oh, I see. It was the perfect moment for you to stand before all these people and humiliate this young man. She nodded toward me. But now that your own truth is out, suddenly it's the wrong time. Whispers grew louder across the hall. The guests, many of whom had likely known Patricia for years, now saw her in a new light. The awe in their gazes had shifted to something else, closer to sympathy. The truth that reshaped everything. Evelyn let the silence linger a moment longer before turning to the crowd. I think it's time the full story came to light, she said. Patricia tensed beside her. Mother, don't. Evelyn paid her no mind. She raised her chin, addressing not just Patricia but every soul in the room. My daughter, Patricia, didn't come from wealth. She wasn't raised in splendor. She had no power or prestige. Evelyn's eyes flicked to me. In fact, she was brought up by a single mother who scrubbed floors for a rich family, a woman who spent her days cleaning houses, laundering clothes, and pinching every cent to give her daughter a shot at something better. Patricia's facade was crumbling. Her breaths came quick and shallow, her fingers shaking faintly. She avoided everyone's gaze, forced, for the first time in years, to confront her past. Patricia didn't grow up with fine china or elite schools, Evelyn went on. She wore hand-me-downs. She ate what was left. And when she was old enough, she worked as a maid herself, right here in this house. A guest gasped audibly. Another muttered, "She was a maid here?" Evelyn nodded. Yes. She worked tirelessly, and I was proud of her for it. She had no father, no connections, no wealth, just her drive. And in time, she caught the attention of a young man named Michael Bennett. All eyes shifted to Michael, Patricia's husband. He sat motionless, arms folded, his face a mask. Evelyn gave a faint smile. He fell for her. He didn't care that she was a maid or that she came from nothing. He saw her for who she was, not for what she didn't have. That love made her who she is today. Evelyn turned to Patricia, her gaze direct. But instead of honoring your roots, instead of extending the same compassion you received, you chose to rewrite your past. You acted like it never happened. Worse, you turned your nose up at others who faced the same struggles you did. Patricia let out a sharp breath. That's enough, she hissed through clenched teeth. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. No, Patricia, you've had your say. Now it's my turn. The power shift. I sat there, still as stone, silent, but my mind was spinning. All the scorn, the judgment, the icy smirks I'd endured, they came from a woman who'd walked the same path I had. Yet she'd chosen to tear me apart instead of building me up. I glanced at Olivia. She wasn't entirely shocked, she'd had her suspicions, but hearing it laid bare, watching her mother come undone before everyone, cut her deeply. I reached for her hand beneath the table. She gripped mine back, her hold fierce. Evelyn took a steadying breath and faced the room again. Ethan, she said, turning to me. I blinked, caught off guard. What? I owe you an apology, she said, for letting Patricia become this version of herself, for not reminding her what really matters. Patricia's lips parted, as if she wanted to protest but couldn't find the words. Evelyn stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. You're not a drifter. You're not a leech. And you're certainly not beneath anyone here, she said. I swallowed, my throat tight. You're a man of character, ambition, and resilience, she continued. Any mother would be lucky to call you her son-in-law. Her words hit harder than Patricia's barbs ever could, they were sincere, heartfelt. For the first time in ages, I felt truly seen. The aftermath, the clapping began tentatively, a few hesitant hands at first, then swelling as more joined in, everyone except Patricia. She sat frozen, her gaze fixed on the floor, her expression blank, her manicured nails digging into the napkin crumpled in her lap. Olivia turned to her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. This is why I picked Ethan, she said softly. He's a better human than anyone here. Patricia didn't utter a word. For the first time in her life, she was speechless, stripped of her usual sharp retorts and commanding presence, all thanks to Evelyn's devastating takedown. As the applause faded, Evelyn faced her daughter one final time. Take this lesson to heart, Patricia, she said firmly. If you don't, you might end up as isolated as you were before you married into this family. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Patricia to stew in the wreckage of her own making. I glanced at Olivia. She let out a long, shaky breath, as if she'd been holding it in all evening. You okay? I asked gently. She gave a small nod. Yeah, I never expected Grandma to be the one to finally shut her down. I cracked a half smile. Me neither. And just like that, the dynamics in the Bennett family flipped. Patricia had ruled with an iron grip for years, but tonight, she'd been toppled. And me? I'd finally come out on top. Patricia stayed quiet for the rest of the reception, not the dignified silence of composure, but the stunned hush of someone who'd been thoroughly defeated in front of everyone. She sat at the head table, rigid as a mannequin, her champagne flute untouched, her lips pressed into a tight line. Now and then, her fingers twitched, like she was itching to say something, to reclaim her authority, to erase the damage. But she couldn't. Evelyn had dismantled her, and every guest in the room knew it. The subtle shift, after Evelyn's speech, the vibe in the room transformed. The way people looked at Patricia had changed. Gone was the awe, the quiet deference, the wariness of crossing her. Some guests avoided her entirely, others traded hushed murmurs, casting quick glances her way, as if seeing her anew for the first time. But the biggest change came from Michael, Patricia's husband. For years, he'd stood by her, nodding along, playing the part of the cool-headed, detached executive. That night, though, his gaze held something different, not the usual passive acceptance, but the weary look of a man whose patience had finally run dry. I realized then that Patricia stood to lose far more than just her ego. The family showdown, the day after the wedding, we were summoned to Evelyn's sprawling estate. Olivia and I arrived side by side, her grip on my hand tight with nerves as we passed through the towering oak doors. "This is gonna be rough," she muttered under her breath. I nodded. "Yeah, I know." Inside, the key players were already assembled. Evelyn presided at the center of the ornate dining table, her presence as formidable as ever. Michael sat beside her, his expression unreadable, hands clasped on the polished wood. Across from them sat Patricia, her posture stiff. She looked the same on the surface, hair perfectly styled, outfit impeccably tailored, but something about her had dimmed. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed diminished, as if she sensed the storm about to break. Olivia and I took our seats. A thick silence hung over the room until Evelyn broke it. "Let's not drag this out," she said sharply. "What happened last night was an utter embarrassment." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Mother." Evelyn raised a hand, silencing her. "You disgraced a man whose only crime was loving your daughter," she pressed on. "You belittled him, insulted him, and in doing so, you dragged our family's name through the mud in front of our friends, our associates, and everyone who matters." Patricia exhaled slowly, her voice taut. "I was only looking out for Olivia," she said. "Looking out for her how?" Evelyn shot back. "By shielding her from a decent man. From someone who genuinely cares for her. From a life free of your obsession with wealth and status." Patricia fell silent. Evelyn turned to Michael. "What's your take on this?" Michael leaned back, letting out a slow breath. For a moment, I thought he'd stay quiet. Then he spoke, his gaze settling on his wife. "I've had enough," he said simply. Patricia's head whipped toward him. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael's expression remained calm, resolute, and that made it all the more devastating. "For years, I've watched you treat people like they're beneath you," he said. "I let it slide. I told myself it's just how you are, that it wasn't my fight. But last night," he shook his head, "you went too far." Patricia's hands balled into fists in her lap. "I was just being truthful," she insisted. "No," Michael countered. "You were being vicious." The room went still. Patricia swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "So, what are you saying?" Michael drew a deep breath, his eyes weary and shadowed. "I'm saying I want a divorce." The collapse of Patricia Bennett, his words landed like a boulder in a tranquil pond. Olivia gasped softly beside me. Even I hadn't seen this coming, not so abruptly, not like this. Patricia froze, her lips parting as if to argue, but no sound came. "You can't mean that," she said at last, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard. Michael nodded. "I do." "You're throwing away our marriage over this?" she demanded, gesturing toward me. Michael sighed. "This isn't about Ethan. It's about you." Patricia stared at him, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Michael, Please, think about what you're saying. I have, he said plainly. For a long time. Patricia's mouth opened again, then she turned to Evelyn, desperation in her eyes. Mother, she pleaded, say something. Evelyn tilted her head. What do you expect me to say? That this is absurd? Patricia snapped. That he's blowing this out of proportion? Evelyn's gaze was unwavering. No. I think he's finally doing what he should have done years ago. Patricia recoiled, as if struck. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked utterly lost, like her entire existence had been built on a fragile illusion of control, and now it was unraveling piece by piece, her reputation, her influence, her marriage. Michael stood. The lawyers will handle the rest, he said, and with that, he walked out. The final strike. Patricia sat there for a long while after he left, motionless. She didn't weep or lash out, she just sat, hollowed out. Then Evelyn spoke again. One more thing, she said. Patricia raised her head, her eyes empty. What now? Evelyn clasped her hands. Your financial support ends here. Patricia's lips parted, but this time, it wasn't arrogance, it was dread. What? She whispered. Evelyn's tone was unyielding. You'll receive no more money from this family. Patricia let out a faint, incredulous laugh. You're joking. I'm not, Evelyn said. You'll need to find work. Patricia stared, the word hitting her like a slap. Work? It shook her more than the divorce had. She'd spent decades in a world where everything was handed to her, looking down on those who toiled to survive. Now, she was one of them. Evelyn rose. Take this to heart, Patricia, she said, her voice softening slightly. This is your last chance to change. Then she walked away, leaving the ruins behind. Olivia and I left together, her hand clutching my arm like a lifeline. We didn't speak for a long stretch. Finally, she let out a heavy breath. Well, she murmured, that was a train wreck. I nodded, finishing her thought. She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. I don't even know if I should feel sorry for her. I didn't respond right away. Patricia had done everything she could to destroy me, to tear us apart. Yet, as we headed to the car, picturing her alone in that sprawling mansion, stripped of her status, her wealth, her husband, I almost felt a twinge of pity. Almost. I gave Olivia's hand a gentle squeeze. She dug her own grave, I said simply. Now she's got a lie in it. Olivia nodded, and with that, we walked away, leaving the tattered remains of the Bennett Empire behind. Stepping away from Evelyn's estate that night felt like emerging from a battlefield. The mansion, once a stronghold of power and dominance, had become a graveyard of consequences, with Patricia as its greatest casualty. Olivia and I drove in silence, the weight of the past 24 hours bearing down, the wedding fiasco, her mother's collapse, the divorce bombshell, the financial cutoff. It was a lot to wrap our heads around. But for the first time in ages, I felt an unexpected lightness, relief. Patricia had loomed over our relationship like a relentless storm, always trying to prove I wasn't good enough for her daughter. Now, that storm had finally passed. She was gone. Navigating the aftermath, a couple of weeks went by before we got any word about Patricia. Olivia and I had slipped back into our usual routines, or as close to usual as you can get after the chaos we'd been through. At first, I didn't give Patricia much thought. My focus was on us, building our life as newlyweds, making sure Olivia was holding up okay. She kept a strong front, but I could tell that losing her mom, even one as destructive as Patricia, weighed on her. She's never going to let this go, Olivia confessed one night, stretched out beside me in bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. I turned to face her. You know none of this is on you, right? I get that, she murmured softly, but it still feels like a piece of me is gone. I reached over, intertwining my fingers with hers. You didn't lose someone who cherished you, I said gently. You lost someone who treated you like a reflection of her own ambitions. That's not a loss, Olivia. That's liberation. She didn't say anything, but her hand tightened around mine. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see it my way. Patricia's wake-up call, then, one evening, the update came. Olivia's phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen, paused, then picked it up. "Dad," she answered warily. I watched her face shift, caution giving way to shock, then settling into something like pity. "What?" she whispered. "Where's she living now?" A pause. "No, I'm not reaching out to her." Another beat, then, more firmly, she chose her path, Dad. She's got to face the consequences. She ended the call. I raised an eyebrow. "What's the deal?" Olivia let out a heavy sigh, massaging her temples. "She's holed up in a cramped apartment across town," she said. "No maids, no money, just her. Dad says she's hunting for a job, but she's never worked a day in her life, so," she gave a short, dry laugh. "It's not going great." I sat up straighter. "Hold up, Patricia Bennett, the woman who spent years sneering at everyone, is now scrambling to find work." Olivia nodded. "Yup. She tried landing a consulting gig with some high-end brand, but they passed. Then she applied to manage a boutique, but she's got no actual skills, so." I dragged a hand across my face. Unbelievable. The woman who'd once branded me a pauper was now fighting to survive in a world that didn't give a damn about her last name. Part of me thought I'd feel smug, but honestly, I felt nothing. Patricia was no longer my burden. An unexpected visitor, 3 days later, she showed up at our doorstep. I opened the door, expecting a delivery guy or maybe a neighbor, not her. She stood there, a far cry from the Patricia Bennett I knew. Her makeup was uneven, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usual designer wardrobe had been swapped for plain, practical clothes. In her hands, she clutched a cheap purse. We locked eyes for a long, awkward moment. Then she let out a sharp breath, peering past me. "Is Olivia here?" I didn't budge. "What are you doing here?" Her gaze met mine, a mix of frustration and shame flickering in her eyes. "I need to speak with her," she said. "She doesn't want to see you," I said evenly. Patricia flinched, just slightly, but I caught it. She swallowed hard. "Please." I hesitated, then called over my shoulder, "Olivia." Footsteps approached, and my wife appeared at my side. The second she saw her mother, her whole body stiffened. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice icy in a way I'd never heard before. Patricia licked her lips nervously. "Can we have a private word?" "No." Patricia's face twitched. "Olivia, I'm still your mother." Olivia folded her arms. "You weren't my mother when you humiliated my husband at our wedding. You weren't my mother when you cared more about your image than about me. And you definitely weren't my mother when you showed me your priorities." Patricia exhaled, exhaustion etched into her features. "I know I messed up," she admitted. "I was wrong. I don't know how to make this right." Olivia's jaw tightened. "This isn't about patching things up, Mom. It's about you realizing you shattered something that can't be fixed." A heavy silence fell. Patricia looked like she wanted to plead, to argue, to say anything, but she didn't. She just stood there, shoulders sagging, her grip tightening on that cheap purse. Finally, she whispered, "I miss you." Olivia's lips parted slightly, but no words came. I saw a flicker of hurt in her eyes, real pain, but not enough to sway her. Then, with a slow, steady breath, she said, "Goodbye, Mom," and closed the door. Patricia Bennett had spent her life towering over others. With a single glance, she could steer conversations, shape family dynamics, and bend people to her will. Her words were sharper than blades, her influence a weapon against anyone who dared defy her. But power is fleeting, and for someone like Patricia, the worst fate wasn't death, it was becoming invisible. After Evelyn and Michael stripped away her wealth, her status, and her marriage, Patricia Bennett had become just that, insignificant. The dethroned queen, it began gradually. The first sign was the gossip. For decades, Patricia had been the woman to know. She was a fixture at every major event, her opinion a deciding factor in high society's choices. People admired her, feared her, craved her approval. But when word spread, about the Bennett divorce, the financial cutoff, the public shaming at Olivia's wedding, the reverence turned to something else, intrigue. Then, worse, pity. No one wanted to be linked with Patricia anymore. She wasn't a valuable connection, she was a liability. Invitations dried up. The friends who once flocked to her vanished overnight. No one said it outright, but the message was clear, she was no longer part of their world. For someone like Patricia, that was a fate crueler than death. Discovering the weight of work, at first, she tried to maintain the facade. She strutted into luxury stores as if she still belonged, wore her old designer pieces, the ones she couldn't afford to replace, and carried herself with her usual haughty air through the city streets. But money slips away fast when you've never had to earn it. Patricia had never held a job. She'd lived off inherited wealth, Michael's fortune, and the privileges she took for granted. Now, with no husband, no inheritance, and no savings, the bills kept piling up. Initially, she dodged reality, assuming someone from her old circle would toss her a lifeline, a job offer, a favor, anything to keep her afloat. But no one called. So, for the first time in decades, Patricia Bennett had to look for work. A role for a fallen monarch, Olivia's dad broke the news to us. Months had passed since we'd heard a peep about Patricia. She hadn't tried to worm her way back into Olivia's life or stage another dramatic showdown at our door. Then, out of the blue, Michael called. "She's working at a department store," he said, his tone almost offhand. Olivia blinked, stunned. "Wait, what?" "Behind a perfume counter," he clarified. "She's selling fragrances." I nearly spit out my coffee. Patricia Bennett, the same woman who'd ridiculed my roots, mocked my hands-on job, labeled me a leech, was now spending her days spritzing expensive scents on shoppers in a department store. Olivia leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. "Wow." "Yeah," Michael muttered. "She's having a rough time." I raised an eyebrow. "You sound almost sorry for her." He sighed. "I'm not. But it's weird to see someone who acted invincible brought so low." The sting of humility, from what we heard, things weren't going smoothly. Patricia didn't know how to handle customers. She had no clue how to sell, how to fake politeness, or how to act like she cared about people she'd always deemed inferior. And it showed. "She's racking up complaints," Michael told us. "She's curt with shoppers, snaps at her colleagues. She still thinks she's royalty in hiding, but nobody's bowing to her anymore." Olivia shook her head. "Mom doesn't know how to function without control, without sway. Her whole life was about dominating others, and now she's invisible." I leaned back, thoughtful. "So, what's her next move?" Michael went quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he said, "She's running out of options." A last-ditch effort. 2 weeks later, she made contact, not with me, not even with Olivia, but with Evelyn. We only found out because Evelyn called Olivia afterward. "She asked me for money," Evelyn said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "After all these years, after all her talk about people who beg for handouts, she came to me for cash." Olivia didn't know what to say. "Neither did I. What did you tell her?" Olivia asked eventually. Evelyn let out a dry chuckle. "I told her no." I exhaled. "How'd she take it?" Evelyn's tone was flat. "Not well. Hitting rock bottom, that was the last we heard of Patricia for a while. She faded into the shadows, slipping into a life no longer defined by luxury and influence. There were no public outbursts, no headline-grabbing scandals, just quiet. Then, months later, Michael gave us the final word. "She's leaving town," he told Olivia. We were at a cafe when the call came, and I watched her brow furrow in surprise. "She's leaving?" Olivia asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "She claims she wants a clean slate," Michael replied. "But honestly, I think she's just humiliated. High society doesn't care about her anymore. She can't afford the lifestyle, and she's exhausted from being ignored." I leaned back in my chair. "So, she's just bailing." He let out a heavy sigh. "Pretty much." Olivia fiddled with her coffee spoon, her gaze fixed on the table. "And she didn't even try to reach out to me?" "No," Michael said softly. "I think she knows she's lost you for good." Olivia fell silent for a long moment. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "I hope she finds some kind of calm." Michael exhaled. "Yeah, me too." The end of Patricia Bennett's story. 2 weeks later, Patricia left the city. No tearful farewell, no last-ditch effort to mend things, she just vanished. And with her departure, it felt like a heavy burden lifted. For the first time in years, we were unshackled. No more fights, no more scrambling to prove my worth to a woman who dedicated her life to tearing me down. Patricia Bennett was gone. In the end, I didn't bring her down. Neither did Olivia, nor Evelyn, nor Michael. Patricia unraveled herself. People like her can't function without control, and when that slipped away, she was left with nothing. A closing reflection: one night, Olivia and I sat on our balcony, the city's twinkling lights stretching out below us. She turned to me, her face pensive. "She spent her whole life trying to pull us apart," she said softly, "and now she's gone, and here we are, still standing strong." I smiled, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "We were always going to make it. Because, ultimately, Patricia tried to crush me, to destroy what we had. But she failed. With her out of the picture, nothing stood in our way anymore. For the first time in ages, we truly triumphed. There was no fanfare when Patricia Bennett left town, no grand exit, no final grab for control, no bitter parting shots. She simply faded away, the way people do when they've lost everything and have no strength left to fight. For years, she'd loomed over Olivia's life like an unyielding force, convinced her wealth, influence, and name made her invincible. But in the end, none of it mattered. And for the first time, I truly grasped something: love doesn't just come out on top, it endures beyond everything else. A life free of dread. In the months after Patricia's exit, Olivia and I settled into a new normal, one without the constant pressure of her demands, without the fear of her meddling, without the endless struggle to prove ourselves. At first, it felt like stepping out of a dark tunnel into warm sunlight. I hadn't realized how much of our lives she'd consumed until she was gone. In her absence, something new took root: freedom. The kind that lets you breathe easy, plan a future without bracing for sabotage, and realize this is how love is meant to feel. Mending old wounds. For Olivia, her mother's absence was both a relief and a quiet ache. Some nights, she seemed lighter, her laughter flowed freely, her shoulders no longer hunched from the battles she'd fought with Patricia. But other nights, she grew quiet, lost in thought, gazing out the window like she was searching for something she couldn't quite pinpoint. One evening, as we lounged on the couch sharing a glass of wine, she let out a soft sigh. "I feel bad," she confessed. I looked at her, caught off guard. "About what?" "For not caring more," she said quietly. "For not being sadder that she's gone." I took her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. "Liv, after all she put you through, put us through, why should you feel sad?" She shrugged, her voice small. "She's still my mom." Even though she was harsh, controlling, and impossible, a part of me kept hoping she'd turn things around. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. She made her choices, and you made yours. You don't owe her your guilt. She exhaled slowly, nodding. I know, she said at last. I wish it could have been different. I pressed a kiss to her temple. We can't rewrite what's behind us, but we can shape how it colors our future. And I meant every word. Patricia had spent years trying to mold Olivia into a version of herself, convincing me I'd never measure up. But she'd failed, and now we were free to craft a life untainted by her shadow. Our first real year as a couple, as time rolled on, Olivia and I carved out a life that was wholly ours. No family drama, no manipulation, no need to justify ourselves to people who didn't matter. We bought a home together, a cozy, inviting place, nothing like the sterile, imposing mansion where she grew up. We filled it with warmth, with shared laughter, with a sense of comfort Patricia could never grasp. There was no vast wealth, no elite social standing, no urge to impress anyone. Yet it was perfect because, for the first time, we weren't living for someone else's approval. We were just ourselves, and that was more than enough. The speech that truly counted, a year after our wedding, the one Patricia had tried so hard to derail, we chose to renew our vows. Not to show off to the world, but to reaffirm something to ourselves. We invited only those who truly mattered, close family, loyal friends, the ones who'd stood by us through the toughest times. Evelyn was there, of course, seated proudly in the front row, her eyes gleaming with quiet wisdom. Michael was there too, more reserved than before, a man who'd lost a wife but gained a deeper bond with his daughter. When the time came for speeches, Evelyn stood up. The room turned to her as she made her way to the microphone with deliberate grace. She paused, looking at us, then broke into a warm smile. I don't have a big speech planned, she said, but I've got something worth saying. She looked at me first. Ethan, she said, I once told you that you had something my daughter never did, integrity. And now, watching you this past year, I know I was spot on. A wave of laughter rolled through the crowd, but my throat tightened with emotion. Evelyn's expression softened. You've given Olivia something money could never buy, a sense of peace, unwavering love, and a home where she feels truly secure. For that, I'll always be deeply grateful. I swallowed hard, managing a nod. Then she turned to Olivia. My dear, she said, you've broken free of the cycle. You've built a life that's yours alone, not shaped by someone else's demands. You've chosen love over dominance, compassion over control, joy over appearances. Olivia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. And because of that, Evelyn said, you're truly free. A profound, heartfelt silence fell, heavier than any speech could be. Then the room exploded into applause, not stiff or hesitant, but genuine. This time, the speech wasn't about tearing anyone down, it was about lifting us up. Patricia's absence, our triumph, in that instant, it hit me. Patricia's departure was the greatest gift she'd ever given us. Her leaving didn't break Olivia, it fortified her. Our love had prevailed, not just in some grand, storybook way, but in the subtle, everyday moments that truly counted. Like how Olivia no longer tensed up at the mention of her mother's name. Or the way we greeted each morning, secure in the life we'd built together, shaped by our own choices. Or how we stood before the people who genuinely cared about us, not just those society labeled as important. Patricia had spent years convinced that wealth equaled power, that prestige was paramount, that love was a mere footnote to dominance. But she'd been dead wrong. Love had outlived her. Standing there, Olivia's hand clasped in mine, I was certain of one thing, no matter what lay ahead, no matter the obstacles we'd face, we'd already claimed victory. And we always would. That night, as Olivia and I swayed slowly under the shimmering lights, she murmured against my chest, we did it. I grinned, drawing her closer. We were always going to. Because when love is authentic, nothing, not even the lingering shadows of the past, can shatter it. And that was our ultimate win. That's all for today's tale on Top Stories Hub. hit subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me what you'd like to see next.